Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever the fuck you're watching this. On the backs of a solid, exciting week one, which piggybacked off a good week zero, nice little primer. This is episode 4 of season 2 of the Tailgate Trash Talk podcast, brought to you by Backyard Sports. I'm riding solo tonight. Stove's got some responsibilities to take care of, so you're gonna have to listen to a little more of hot air leave my mouth. So I apologize for that in advance. But without further ado, let's look at week one, and let's start right here with a pretty surprising result. Oklahoma State, Central Michigan, Thursday night. This looked like Oklahoma State was going to cover pretty easily. They were up huge, 51-15 at one point, and then the wheels fell off, and Mike Gundy couldn't get the boys to rally the troops and close it out against Central Michigan. Really surprising result here that, late in the game, it looked like there was a chance that Central Michigan was going to get this thing down to one possession, maybe, put some real pressure on Oklahoma State, and we would have had a pretty huge upset because, Oklahoma State has some aspirations in the Big 12. They had a chance last year late in the season to potentially win that title and maybe even sneak into the playoff. And this isn't a good way to start the season, looking to rebound off of that and have a better season in the Big 12. So, Mike's going to have to, be a man as he says he is, and start to get his boys ready to play, here in week two. You've got to play better than you did against Central Michigan in that second half. They looked really good for the first half, so I'm hoping, if I'm an Oklahoma State fan, I'm hoping that second half was an anomaly, and we're going to turn this thing around this week and have a more complete game. Maybe play all 60 minutes of the game, because they certainly did not play the entire 60 minutes last week against Central Michigan. So really disappointed if I'm a fan of the Pokes. And have aspirations for this season. Another really, really good game here, sort of surprising result. If you're a Pitt fan, maybe if you're a fan of the ACC, Pittsburgh wins 38-31 over West Virginia. The 17th ranked team in the nation escapes in their own backyard. Right, backyard brawl. Pittsburgh at home against West Virginia. And honestly, hey, Dad, thanks for tuning in. Honestly, if, a lot of people on the national stage might not have thought West Virginia belonged in this game. I don't know that there's a lot of expectations for that team. But what I saw on Thursday night, if Pittsburgh's going to be legit, West Virginia is also going to threaten a lot of people in the Big 12, especially because they've got some dogs on that offensive side of the ball. Richardson and Bryce Ford Wheaton, and JT Daniels looked really good under center. Yeah, Mike, absolutely incredible game. And to be honest, West Virginia probably has a right to feel like they let that one slip away. Would have been a great upset to start the season, of course. Rivalry game, right, in the backyard brawl. They had the ball at 31-31, driving down the field, and a guy who had an incredible game, Bryce Ford Wheaton, had an incredible game up to this point, has a ball go through his hands because he's trying to turn upfield and run before he caught the ball. Fundamentals, right? Catch the ball before you start running, because things like this can happen. And of course, the ball takes a fortuitous bounce for Pittsburgh right into a defensive back's hands. And of course, he's got elite speed. He's probably their fastest player on their team, not just on the defense. And he takes it back to the house, makes it 38-31 after the extra point. West Virginia has a chance driving late, and they miss by just a few inches. If JT Daniels can just get the ball a few inches higher, or if the receiver maybe could cut his route a little bit shorter, they've got to catch inside the 10, inside the 5, and a first down, which would stop the clock, and an opportunity to tie this game up. And who knows, right? If you can get this game into overtime, being a rivalry, having all of that momentum. So that was a nip-tuck game, really, really entertaining game. And to be honest, for a week one, it really was a splash right out of the gates, having this, Pittsburgh versus West Virginia matchup, the rivalry to begin with, and then the game delivered. Absolutely. So Looking a little later in the evening, Wake Forest VMI, kind of ho-hum here, 44-10, big underdog VMI. Wake Forest should have rolled in this game as they did. Big news for Wake Forest this week, though, off the early tune-up game against VMI, they get the news that Sam Hartman, who had a procedure done in the offseason, and they were a little hush-hush about it, but he had a blood clot removed. It's been revealed this week. So he has been cleared physically, medically cleared to resume football. He may play for them this weekend. I haven't seen an updated announcement yet that says he will, but that's a big get for Wake Forest because he was really the general of that offense last year, an offense that scored a lot of points. It was quite prolific. If anybody remembers the Wake versus UNC fourth quarter that was, and we've got it. UNC had another fourth quarter. It wasn't a top 25 matchup, but UNC, Appalachian State, little aside, 64, I think, points in the fourth quarter, and Appalachian State has a chance, at the end to tie it up with a 2-point conversion and couldn't get it done. But what a fourth quarter that was. But back to Sam Hartman and Wake Forest. Wake Forest, if they're going to go anywhere in the ACC this year, this has to be a boost for them, right? Getting their leader back, getting a likely first-round quarterback back in the fold. This is a guy that can make that offense hum, and coming off a tune-up game, give him an opportunity here if he can get back, with their matchup this week, get him back in the huddle. Could be something that really takes Wake Forest to the next level, because if you watch the Clemson game, which we're going to review here in a minute, that ACC still feels pretty wide open because Pitt struggled against West Virginia, which wasn't expected. And Clemson, if they're going to stick with DJ, it's likely they're going to drop some games because he looks awful. Not to spoil too much about Clemson, Wake Forest, really, really good news that they're getting Sam Hartman back this week. All right, so we shift over to Friday, and Michigan State, Western Michigan. Michigan State didn't pull away, right away, and it was 7-3 at one point, at the end of the first quarter, of course, 7-3 here. And it looked like Michigan State was going to struggle a little bit with Western Michigan, which isn't a good sign for a team that was in the Big Ten hunt last year, signed Mel Tucker to a huge deal. They end up pulling away, score 28 points the rest of the way, and win by a bucket full, but not a great start for them. It looks like they're struggling a little bit from what the pieces of this game that I caught. It looks like they're struggling a little bit to get the running game going. And of course, you lose Kenneth Walker, a Heisman candidate last year. It might be a situation where they're going to have to feel their way through this for the first few games of this season before they get into Big Ten play. If you're a Michigan State fan, you're probably not super encouraged by the way that game started, but the way it finished, you're looking at a Michigan State team that, as long as they can start to get things going, should be okay. Saturday, we shift into Alabama, Utah State, 55-0. The line was like 51 or something in this. This was to be expected. Utah State, despite getting a win there in week 0, really can't stack up against Alabama. Little tune-up out the gate. Bryce Young looks crisp. Looks like Alabama's offense is reloaded after losing guys last year to the draft, and big starters for them. They just go ahead and reload because that's what Alabama does. Ho-hum, 55-0 over Utah State. The big game of the weekend, probably the biggest matchup, depending on whether you're a fan of a different team or not, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and this was another game for me that I kind of had to eat a little bit. I had taken Oklahoma State to cover. I took West Virginia outright. I had a rough weekend with my picks, rough weekend with the wagers against the lines. But another one here, I had kind of disrespected Notre Dame, saying that Ohio State was going to roll by 4 scores, 24 points or so, and Notre Dame hung in. That defense looks real. They're going to struggle to score points, though. They don't really have playmakers like we've seen from them in the past with guys like Claypool and Ian Book when he was coming along. It's going to be a struggle for them to score points this year, but man, that defense is going to keep them in a lot of games because Ohio State is loaded on offense with talent. Despite losing Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, they are pretty loaded on the offensive side of the ball with talent. And Notre Dame was able to hold them to 21 points. And really, for large portions of this game, the Ohio State offense looked out of sorts because of what Notre Dame was able to do. They've got a lot of big-time players on the defensive side of the ball there at Notre Dame. Watch out in next year's draft. There's going to be some guys coming off the board in the first round off that defense. So big weekend, for Ohio State to get a win over a top 5 school. Notre Dame rightfully doesn't drop too far in the polls because they lost to the number 2 team in the country. As of last week, of course, the rankings flopped this week. If you've seen them come out, where Georgia moved up to 2 and Ohio State down to 3. But big top 5 matchup here, and Ohio State's they've got a notch in their belt, right? They've got a pelt on the wall that they can say, we've got to win over a top 5 opponent. And of course, those are always uber important down the stretch when it comes to playoff time. If Ohio State loses a game in Big Ten play, they can always hang their hat on saying, we've got a top 5 win. Any other one-loss teams might not have such a claim, right, to stake in terms of getting into the playoff chase. Georgia, Oregon, another matchup here of top 25 teams, number 3 versus number 11, and this didn't look like a matchup of 2 top 25 teams. Honestly, though, this sort of goes to form, right? If Stove and I talking last week are to be believed, the Pac-12 is going to be pretty weak. And the weekend really ended up showing that. Utah, we're going to talk about that here in a minute. They go down. Oregon goes down big to Georgia. Not a great weekend for the high-ranked teams there in the Pac-12. USC salvaged a bit, but here Georgia just steamrolled. And a bit unexpected because Georgia did lose. They lost Cook and they lost Pickens and ton on the defensive side of the ball, but man, they've got some dogs again this year on defense. Oregon never had a chance. They couldn't get anything going, and Bo Nix didn't look great at Auburn, most of the time when he was playing in Auburn, and he kept going with that here in this game. Would he end up with 4 turnovers, I think, by the end of the day? A couple of picks early that that really kind of started the avalanche, and Georgia just kept going with it. They scored 7 straight touchdowns to open the game. 7 possessions, 7 touchdowns, and they finish at 49-3 over what was the number 11 team in the country. Unbelievable performance by Georgia. A&M, Sam Houston. I think the only surprise here is that it was only 31. Sam Houston, far inferior. A&M's got some issues at quarterback, and they're going to have to figure that out going forward, because this is a team that's got big-time aspirations. They have the number 1 recruiting class, reloaded the cupboards, but 31 points against Sam Houston is an issue on the offensive side of the ball. For a guy in Jimbo Fisher, who quite frankly has had really good success with quarterbacks in the past, winning a Heisman with Jameis Winston, scoring a ton of points at Florida State. They scored quite a bit last year, right? They averaged a lot of points a game last year. They've got to get this quarterback situation figured out going forward, or else they're going to struggle. And honestly, in a tough SEC, especially being in the SEC West, which is almost like an NFL conference, really, with some of the competition that's in the SEC West, A&M is not going to be able to afford, and they're not going to be able to make up for poor quarterback play. So they've got to get it figured out. 31 points against Sam Houston is unacceptable. If I'm Jimbo Fisher this week, we're working on a lot of things on the offensive side of the ball. One of the upsets of the weekend here, and there was a lot of talk from SEC folks that Florida shouldn't have been an underdog. Vegas had the line pretty close. If I remember correctly, it was like 3 or 3.5. In the Swamp, of course, tough place to play. But number 7, Utah, who had college football playoff aspirations to start the season, especially based on how they finished last season, goes into the Swamp and they get beat 29-26. The Heisman candidacy has started there in Florida. They're gonna have some things to talk about, remind them of the Tebow years and the Chris Leak days, and they've got something going. I'm interested to see if they can keep it going. I think that Utah got a little bit shell-shocked, and unfortunately for them, it's going to be tough for them to recover from a loss to an unranked opponent if Florida doesn't continue to win games this season in a tough SEC. They've got to play Georgia. They've got a couple opponents from the SEC West, and Florida to start the season wasn't really expected to be that good. So this is not a good loss for Utah. This isn't one that they're going to be able to hang their hat on and say, yeah, but they're a really good team, or yeah, but they're a top 5, top 10 teams, because I don't believe that's what Florida is. So tough one to recover from. Utah's going to have to run the table to have a chance of getting in the playoff. All right, Colorado State, Michigan, 44-point win here for Michigan, as they should, rolling heavy against a far outmanned Colorado State team. Harbaugh with his fucking weird quarterback drama. I don't know what he's doing. We talked about it last week. Like, what's he doing starting one guy one week and one guy the next? And then mid-game, he goes from one quarterback to the next. It's a mess. When you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Michigan, I worry, if I'm a Michigan fan, I worry what this means for the rest of the season, because this isn't what you want under center. This isn't the decisions you want. Yeah, maybe in Harbaugh we trust because of the Big Ten championship last year and making the playoff, but I don't see this ending well with this quarterback carousel, this quarterback flip-flopping that they're doing. So, for me, it's pick one and stick with it. We'll see, right? Maybe Harbaugh knows what the hell he's doing, but it don't make any sense to me. Yeah, Mike, I don't know what the fuck Harbaugh's doing. Anyway, Oklahoma UTEP. Oklahoma rolls over the Miners, 45-13. Nice debut for Brent Venables. The schedule was favorable, right? You get a nice little tune-up as your first game as a head coach of a major college program here after years of working as Dabo Swinney's defensive coordinator. Brent Venables, nice debut. Oklahoma looks like they've got some guys, and they're not going to miss Caleb Williams' transfer too much. It appears they got some really good play from the offensive side of the ball, running the ball pretty well, pretty decent play under center, and you expect, right, that defense for Oklahoma is going to be better and maybe be one of the best in the Big 12 because of who they've got at head coach, right? Brent Venables had some of the best defenses in college football, coached some of the best playmakers on the defensive side of the ball when he was at Clemens, guys like Cleveland Farrell and Isaiah Simmons, and the list just goes on with guys that played at Clemson that were phenomenal and of course thrived under the tutelage of Brent Venables. So if that offense can continue to score points for Oklahoma, they might run away with the Big 12, because I'm not sure Oklahoma State after week 1 has what it takes to contend in the Big 12. Baylor, they've got a real tough matchup this week, a top 25 matchup, and you wonder if they're going to be able to capture some of the same magic they captured last year. So Oklahoma, if that defense plays well and that offense can continue going, this might be Oklahoma's conference to lose. All right, speaking of Big 12, Baylor plays Albany, and as I mentioned last week, if you had asked me without any context if Albany had a football team, I would have said no. They have a pretty good basketball team, but they do have a football team, and their football team got absolutely fucking boat raced by Baylor. 69 to 10, run away there. Hopefully, if you're Baylor, hopefully this is a sign of things to come, but I don't know how much of a gauge a team like Albany can be. They're not really a contender even at the FCS level. So be it. Baylor, you'd like to get off to a nice tune-up here, but we'll see. They've got some litmus test games coming up. NC State, East Carolina, maybe the scare of the weekend, here at the number 13 ranked Wolfpack. And we talked about the number being short. Vegas had this, I think it was 6.5 or something like that. In East Carolina, they obviously knew something we didn't. I thought NC State would roll pretty good here. They've got probably the best quarterback in the country. They didn't look good On offense, they were kind of choppy, a little bit out of sync. East Carolina was doing some things to confuse maybe the first pick in the draft next year in Leary, maybe, possibly, and they really kept him in check all day, 21-20, and East Carolina had a chance late, but NC State was able to kind of stand up and hold that lead. So not a good look for the ACC here with the Wolfpack, and Pittsburgh struggling. Clemson didn't look great with DJ. We'll talk about that in a moment, but ACC, not looking great. USC, Rice, just mentioned Oklahoma, the coach who vacated that position, which allowed Brett Venables to get a head coaching position, goes out to USC, takes Caleb Williams with him, and Caleb Williams starts what a lot of people think is going to be a Heisman candidacy with a really efficient, really high-powered, potent offensive display against, of course, let's temper it a little bit because Rice was very outmanned here, but USC puts up 66. They look like they're off and running under Lincoln Riley, and it's tough as Rice to go all the way out to LA and have to play against a team that's loaded with some talent there. So good debut for Lincoln Riley and USC and Caleb Williams, of course. The transfer portal was very friendly to the USC Trojans, and it showed here in week 1 with some of the points, some of the plays they were able to make. They've got a lot of talent there. So that might be the team with Oregon getting trounced by Georgia and Utah dropping one that they shouldn't have dropped. USC might be in the catbird seat here with the Pac-12 and have an opportunity to ride the reputation that the Pac-12 still carries with the voters for some odd reason into maybe a playoff appearance. So Miami, Bethune-Cookman, yeah, valiant effort here, 70-13 though. Miami, Mario Cristobal debut went well, tune up here to start the season. He scored 70 points. Anytime you score 70 points, you're doing something right. Miami looks like they might have an offense this year. Defense has always kind of been there for them in terms of having the ability to make plays, cause turnovers. The turnover chain obviously is a popular thing for them. But if this offense is going to be able to put up points like this, they may end up being kind of the shining star within the ACC, pending Clemson. If Clemson figures it out with DJ or decides it's finally time to move on, which they should, Miami may end up being the shining star here in the ACC. Big time performance offensively, scoring 70 points to open the season. Wisconsin, Illinois State, as they should have, 38-0 drubbing here of the Red Hawks. Wisconsin looks like Wisconsin always does. Big, physical, run the ball, play defense, and they were clearly much, much, much more talented than this Illinois State team. Arkansas, Cincinnati. This ended up being a thriller. It was not early. Arkansas was kind of asserting their dominance over Cincinnati, and you were starting to feel, at least I was by halftime, starting to feel like, Cincinnati is going to miss Desmond Ridder more than maybe I wanted to admit. I like Luke Fickell. I thought the defense was going to be able to carry them a bit. Defense kept them in the game. Arkansas had some opportunities that they could have really put this game away. And once the offense got going in the second half for Cincinnati, I think that they're going to be okay. However, a one-loss Group of 5 team is not going to make the playoffs. So for Cincinnati, it's going to be a matter of them winning their conference, getting into a good bowl game, and continuing some of that momentum they had from last year, making the CFP, and potentially reloading for another run next year or the year after. Had they won this game over Arkansas, though, this could have been similar to that Notre Dame win for them last year. Would have been the feather in the cap, would have been a nice little resume builder potentially to be that Group of 5 representative in the college football playoff again. But it's not going to happen this year. Tough game. Arkansas looks like they're going to play the same style of ball they played last year, and they're gonna once again be an issue for some of these teams in the SEC. So they are moving in the right direction, and I love to see it. Woo pig suey. All right. Next game we're looking at here, Kentucky, Miami of Ohio. I think another one of these where it's a little surprising that they didn't pull away a little more, but winning by 24, 37 points in your opener, Stoops has got them going, right? And Kentucky's got a big matchup this week that could kind of separate them in that SEC East as the team that's going to maybe contend with Georgia in the SEC East. So good start to the season here. Parlay that, and let's see what you can do here in week 2. Ole Miss over Troy, 28-10. Another one that I thought they would pull away by more. Lane Kiffin, of course, he's trying to figure out what the post Matt Corral era looks like. Maybe a little bit kind of skittish or rusty to start the season. They don't quite have everything in order. Still got a nice win there, 28-10. Ole Miss over Troy. The game of the week, I'm going to save this one for last because I want to talk about this game. And we've got a Roadrunner fan that usually tunes in here. So I'm going to save that game for last. BYU, South Florida. BYU shows, hey, maybe we do belong in the top 25. 50 points on South Florida on the road, 50-21 over South Florida. And they've got another big matchup this week as well. BYU does. So I think we're going to start to see some separation for them. They're looking ahead. They've got a good matchup this week, but they're looking ahead. They've got a big matchup with Notre Dame later in the season as well. BYU is that team that's going to have the resume if they're going to be the next team in that next small school after Cincinnati got in last year. BYU is going to have the resume because they've got some good teams on their schedule. And they're going to be able to say, hey, we've got a couple of big-time wins against possibly top 10 teams if they can run the table. Good start there for them, 50-21 over South Florida. The game that closed the whole week, Monday night, Clemson, Georgia Tech. And to be honest, this 41-10 score is very, very deceiving. If you watched the game, DJ Uiagalelei is not the guy. I don't know what it is with Dabo, why he feels so loyal, so committed to DJ. We saw it all year last year. He struggles with footwork in the pocket. He throws a weird ball too. If you watch his ball, it moves in the air. The nose of the ball is not straight. The ball's all over the place. It sort of flutters despite throwing a spiral, which is a weird thing to see. It's got to be a hard ball to catch if you're a wide receiver. He's not very accurate. He's sort of athletic, but he doesn't use it very well. Ended up having a rushing touchdown in that game, but he doesn't look graceful when he's navigating the pocket, navigating pressure, navigating down the field. He doesn't look super graceful. If they're going to contend for a national championship this year, the guy who came in on the last drive of that game and took that team down the field with incredible efficiency, he looked poised, made the right decisions, threw a couple of balls away when there wasn't anything there, moved through his progressions really quickly. Cade Klubnik, the number 1 quarterback prospect coming into this year, he's waiting in the wings, and I don't know how long of a leash Dabo's going to have for DJ, but in my opinion, that leash should not be as long as it already has been this year. I think at some point this season, we're going to see DJ struggle against a good team in the ACC, and Dabo's going to pull the plug. Cade's going to come in, make some plays, maybe sort of how we saw Caleb Williams seize the starting job from Rattler last year. Klubnik is the guy, and I know he's a freshman, a true freshman, but he's the guy in Clemson. And I don't know how long it's going to take Dabo to figure it out. If I'm a Clemson fan, I hope it's not a loss that helps him figure that out, because that can hurt really bad in the playoff, especially when you think of Wake Forest getting their quarterback back, the ACC potentially being down, as they have been the last few years. There's a lot of teams in the top 25, but they didn't look really good this past weekend, a few of them. So Clemson can't take a loss or 2 losses and expect to have a chance to get in the playoffs. So I don't think the leash should be long. We'll see how long that leash is for DJ. And I want to close out with the thriller of the weekend. University of Houston versus UTSA, the Roadrunners. I had them in an upset, and they damn near pulled it off. To be honest, there were a couple of things that happened late in that game that I thought went against UTSA and really could have shifted the momentum, shifted the tide of this game. I thought that they were, and there's Aaron, yep, Roadrunners. I thought that UTSA was going to pull this game off. And then a couple of things, the officials ran the clock and shouldn't have. They lost like 35 seconds off the clock. They could have, instead of having to just play for the tie at the end, they could have potentially had a shot or two at the end zone to win this game in regulation. And to be honest, the way they were moving the ball against this Houston defense, and they've got a sneaky good dual threat prospect there. If teams at the next level are looking for backups for certain guys, right? Tennessee took Malik Willis. If they're going to embrace the running aspect of the quarterback in their offense, Baltimore, San Francisco, you could see potentially UTSA here, at the quarterback position might have a guy that could be sneaky, and an NFL team could look to slot him in as their backup and potentially have a guy that can come in and be seamless. Frank Harris, remember that name. Could be a seamless transition from a guy like Lamar Jackson, Malik Willis, Trey Lance out in San Francisco. If you're looking for a reliable insurance policy. So very athletic guy, pretty strong arm, pretty accurate too. A lot of those guys, sometimes when they're those run first, run frequently guys, sometimes the accuracy can pay the price a little bit. But I like, Harris threw some darts in that game. But overtime, the fucking rules of college football, we've got to get away from this fucking 2-point conversions after triple overtime, because it just ruined what an incredibly exciting game. We get 2 overtimes where both teams had to match, and it was incredible. And then we go to the dumbest fucking rule in all of sports, and it's 2-point conversions back and forth. What the fuck are we doing? That is such asinine nonsense. The NCAA, I hoped that cooler heads would prevail after last season, and they didn't. And we get a kind of a dud ending to an incredible game. Get rid of the fucking rule. Play the game. Let them go. If it takes 25 overtimes, it takes 25 overtimes. Ask Ole Miss and Eli Manning how that game put him, when they went to, 8 overtimes, it put him on the fucking national radar. It's nonsense. It's nonsense that we go to 2-point conversions after 3 overtime, or in the 3rd overtime. Can't have it. It's almost as bad as the it's worse than it, but it reminds me of the ghosty rule in baseball, having a guy at second base in extra innings. All right, let's take a quick sponsor break here, and then we'll jump into week 2 preview. This week's sponsor, PocketPairClub.com. Thanks to Pocket Pair Club number 26881 for that sponsor break. All right, let's look at week 2, top 25 matchups here. We start out with what could be a good one, right? Alabama, Texas. Texas, I think, is on the upswing, sort of. The Arch Manning news, and of course, the transfer portal was pretty nice to them this past offseason. But it's still Alabama, 20-point spread. I think that number's about the number. Hopefully we'll have a little better week this week than we had last week. We missed on laying some big spreads, but I'm going to lay this one. Feels a little bit big. 20 points, of course. with two Power Five teams matched up here. But I'm going to lay the points because Alabama looks like Alabama's on a mission to prove that last year was a rebuilding year. I don't know why Saban said that. How about you lost your two best wide receivers for the national championship game. One of them in the game, you lost him. Plus your tight end was hurt, nicked up. Sometimes it happens, man. And if that was a rebuilding year and you still had wide receivers going off the board in the first round and all those defensive players, of course it's Alabama, right? But I'm going to lay the points here. I think Bama by maybe 23, 24 points here against Texas. Although I do think Texas is heading in the right direction. Arkansas State, Ohio State, this should be ho-hum. 44.5 it's a big, big number. But to be honest, Ohio State should probably roll in this one by 50. So I'm going to lay the points again on a big spread. Southern Miss, Miami. I think this is going to be another ho-hum one. Southern Miss is kind of in the the dumps here after a few years, maybe a decade ago, where they looked like a program that was on the rise. They kind of back where they were. Miami, 25. That might be a bit much. I think I'm going to take the points with Southern Miss. Give me Miami by maybe 3 touchdowns, 21 points. Arkansas, South Carolina. And we on this show are very supportive of Beamer ball. We are not very supportive of Spencer Rattler. However, the combination of Beamer ball and Spencer Rattler might be enough for South Carolina to have some success this year. I think, Frank's son, the legend Frank Beamer, they're bringing that. And they had 2, I believe, blocked kicks in last week's game that resulted in points. So Beamer ball is alive and well down in Columbia. Arkansas, however, I think that they are I keep bringing up the wrong one. They are in a position that they have bigger aspirations. I want to pick the upset because my heart is telling me Beamer ball is enough, but give me Arkansas. I don't know that I'm laying the points though. I think this is going to be a real tight contest. So I think I'm going to take the points with South Carolina. Eight's a pretty decent number in this matchup. So give me South Carolina plus a tutty, and we'll ride down there in Arkansas. Wake Forest, Vanderbilt. Wake is a 12.5 point favorite. Vanderbilt is coming off a 60-point game in Honolulu against Hawaii, where teams historically have struggled. And I was talking with Stove that, we didn't think Vanderbilt was going to win that game. Possibly Hawaii was going to give them some trouble. And Vanderbilt proved that wrong. 63-10, I believe, was the final score. But give me Wake Forest getting Sam Hartman back. If he starts for them, especially, give me Wake Forest in this. I don't know that I'm laying the points, though. So I'm going to take the 12 and a hook with Vanderbilt. But give me Wake Forest by maybe 8 or 10. Charleston Southern, NC State, no line in this. NC State has to bounce back in this game and look better than they did last week against East Carolina, or it's going to be a long season down there. You have to get better production out of the offense. You've got an NFL quarterback, possibly the first off the board next year in terms of quarterbacks. You've got to look better this week against a severely outmanned Charleston Southern team. Look for NC State to tune things up here and potentially hang 50 on Charleston Southern. Southern Utah versus Utah. This is going to be a very important game for Utah to bounce back as well after that tough loss in the Swamp. I honestly thought Utah was going to drop a little further in the polls. They went from 7 to 13, but I think that is reflective of what we're going to see later here with Florida moving all the way up to number 12 after being unranked last week and not really even in consideration to be ranked. They jump all the way to 12 with a win over number 7 Utah. So I think Utah only dropping to 13 is sort of a reflection of the fact that the voters swung heavily into Florida's favor in terms of the sentiment there, and Florida jumps really high. Utah slides 6 spots, right? That's a decent fall, but it's not as far as I thought they would fall. They should roll. No line. Southern Utah, not much of a chance here. Give me maybe 40, 45 points here as Utah should hammer Southern Utah. Notre Dame, Marshall. Marshall is one of those teams that sometimes can sneak up on you. Mac Shin, of course, is a real thing. I just don't think they've got the horses to stick with Notre Dame. 20.5. I don't love that number in terms of giving those points away for Notre Dame after what I saw from the offense last week. But I don't think they're going to score much. So it could be a game that's 31-7. So I'm going to lay the points, but I'm going to sweat it. It's not going to be an easy cover here if you're laying the points with Notre Dame. So Furman, Clemson, maybe this is the game that gets a little bit of confidence for DJ, because that was all we heard about last week during the game. Confidence. That's the big consideration for DJ. Clemson's got to figure it out. And if he comes out of the gates and struggles against Furman, that leash might get real tight. And Dabo may be looking to make a change if they're struggling against a far inferior Furman squad here. App State, Texas A&M. App State coming off that close game against UNC, potential upset, right? Would have been a nice big win for them. Nobody goes into Boone and just rolls over App State, and UNC and Mac Brown got firsthand exposure to that. A&M's got to figure out the offense. If they struggle this week under center as they did last week, they could look back on this game and say, yep, that's where our playoff chances fell right out the window. App State might go into College Station and knock off Texas A&M. 19-point spread. I'm not laying the 19, no chance. I think A&M wins. They should, but it's not going to be as comfortable as they want it to be. Give me App State plus the 19, maybe A&M by 10, maybe 13. Tennessee, Pittsburgh, big matchup here for two teams that are heading in, the same direction in terms of program, but one team won very comfortably last week against a team that they should have blown out, and the other team played a rivalry game and was on the ropes late in the game. Pittsburgh might be 0-1 if Bryce Ford Wheaton hangs on to that football. West Virginia, I fully believe, was going to head down and score a touchdown to take the lead in that game, or at least put 3 points on the board, because the best last name in all of football, Mr. Leg, kicking for West Virginia, is very reliable. Tennessee, though, laying 6.5 here. I think that number is correct. I'm going to give those points. I'm going to lay those points. Tennessee by 7. Give me Tennessee by a full touchdown here on the road, knocking off Pittsburgh. I think Tennessee's on the upswing here in the SEC, and they're going to make some noise in that SEC East this year. Washington State, Wisconsin. Scotty should roll. 17.5 is probably close. I say it's closer to 20, so I'm going to lay those points with Wisconsin. That physicality that they bring to the table, I don't think Washington State's going to be able to stand up to it. Samford, Georgia. Yep, Georgia's going to roll probably by 50, maybe 60, maybe 70. The way that offense looked last week, they might hammer Samford pretty good here down in Athens. Another one of these kind of SEC tune-up games. Georgia coming off a big win against Oregon, probably hangs at least 60 on Samford. Michigan State, Akron. Michigan State should roll. They looked a little sluggish early last week on offense. If what they were doing in the second half carries over to this week, they should certainly cover 34.5 against Akron. I'm going to lay those points. I liked what I saw in the second half from Michigan State last week. I think they're going to start getting a little more going in the running game. Sans Kenneth Walker. I'm going to lay the points. Akron's, they don't have the talent to stand up with Michigan State. Houston, Texas Tech. So Houston drops from 24 to 25 after, their matchup last week with, UTSA. Tennessee moves up into the poll, knocks them down a spot. Florida moves up. Other teams dropping out. Houston drops down, stays in the top 25 here, but they are dogs on the road in Lubbock, and I'm right here. I think this is going to be a push. I've got Texas Tech by a field goal. I wish I could say that I want to take, one side of that spread or the other, but I'm going to push, and I'm going to say Texas Tech by a field goal here at home. Vegas, I think, is right on the nose with that number. Maybe the over is the play here. 63 seems low for a high-powered Texas Tech offense that doesn't have a ton of defense. And we saw Houston get a little bit hot on offense last week. So this is a game that could be in the 30s or 40s for each team. In the end, settled, in my opinion, settled by a field goal. Kent State, Oklahoma. Oklahoma should roll. The way they looked last week on offense, they've got a little something going there, and that defense should be just fine against Kent State. 33.5 is a lot, but I'm going to lay the points. I'm going to lay the points. I think Oklahoma's going to roll against Kent State. Take those points and run to the bank. Kentucky, Florida. Florida's a 6-point favorite coming off a huge upset of Utah in the Swamp. If they're going to prove to the nation that it was not a fluke, that they are for real, this is a game that they have to have. They cannot come out here and let an upstart on the upswing Kentucky team. Stoops has got them rolling, but you can't go out and lose this game if you're Florida after that big win over Utah. And to be honest, if I'm Utah, I'm rooting for Florida to win this game. I don't see it. I've got Kentucky. I've got Kentucky straight. This is my upset pick of the week here. Kentucky beating Florida in the Swamp. I just like what Kentucky's doing. They're solid on both sides of the ball. Their special teams is really consistent. Give me Kentucky going into Florida. I think Florida potentially has, maybe a little bit of a hangover as well after that huge win against Utah. Give me Kentucky here in the upset. Ole Miss, Central Arkansas. This is a game that I'm looking for Lane Kiffin to start to show that they've got things going in the right direction on offense post Matt Corral. So Ole Miss, looking for you to roll. You should score at least 40, maybe 50 here against Central Arkansas. Should roll pretty comfortably. USC, Stanford, upset alert. Upset alert. If you know anything about the history of the Pac-12, know anything about the history of playing at Stanford, they are a team that should always have people's feelers up. Your sensors should always be on high alert here. USC's a 9-point favorite going into Stanford. Stanford's the team that it seems like there's one game every year that Stanford's like that. They knock, they've knocked Oregon off in the past. They've knocked USC off in the past. They've knocked Notre Dame off in the past. So upset alert here. I'm not taking the upset, but I'm gonna hedge, right? And say this is your upset alert game, but I'm not taking it. I'm not laying those points though. This is going to be a nail biter late. USC is gonna win this probably by 6. Take the points with Stanford. 9 is a good number. They're at home. Shaw always seems to have a good game plan against these big-time, high-ranked teams. Stanford going to put a scare in USC, but I'm gonna take USC by 6. Another one here that if you watched Oklahoma State last week, I talked about it quite a bit to start the episode this week. They better not be the team from the second half against the Fighting Herms here, because Arizona State's going to go into Stillwater and knock off Oklahoma State if that's the team that shows up this week. Spread's 11.5, I think. Yeah, 11.5. I'm not laying the points. I'll take Oklahoma State's defense to hold down the fort against Arizona State, but it's going to be a one-possession game. Oklahoma State by maybe 4. And we're still going to have, in my opinion, a lot of questions about this Oklahoma State team as they get out of week 2 and start to look ahead in terms of their Big 12 schedule. Not impressed with what they looked like last week, especially in the second half, and I don't think we're going to be overly impressed after this week. Oklahoma State by 4. Michigan, Hawaii. The questions about the quarterback give me concerns for this game. And the line, 51. 51 is such a huge number. But then I look at what Vanderbilt did in Honolulu last week, winning by 53. I'm probably going to have to lay the points. I think Michigan could turn around and hand the ball off 70 times this game and score 60, maybe 70 points against a very outmanned, very underwhelming Hawaii team. I'm going to lay the points. Michigan, they're at home, and the guys, the boys from Hawaii have to fly all the way to Ann Arbor. And Michigan is just that much better than Hawaii. And a big game to round out the weekend, Baylor BYU. If BYU is going to put together a resume that says we are this year's Cincinnati, they've got 2 games on their schedule that are absolutely going to allow them to prop up that resume, starting this week against number 9 Baylor. And you can see Vegas has BYU a 3-point favorite over the number 9 Baylor Bears. And to be honest, this is another game that I hate to do it, but I'm going to call it a push. I've got BYU by a field goal. I don't think I would bet this line. I think that line is so spot on. I think BYU by a field goal in this game at home. And this is where they start their national candidacy to be the next Cincinnati making the playoffs as a small school. BYU here over Baylor by 3 at home. If they were in Baylor, I'd probably take Baylor by 3-7. But being in Provo, I think that BYU is going to knock off Baylor here, and they're going to do it by a field goal. All right, that brings us to our conclusion. Week 1 in the books, week 2 coming up. Some big matchups this week, upset alerts across the board. Going to be another great weekend. I'm excited. We had a great week 1 after a really good week 0. So glad college football is back. Look forward to seeing everybody again next week. Appreciate the comments. Appreciate the interaction. This has been Season 2, Episode 4 of Tailgate Trash Talk. We are out.